Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. I made it home from the Houston Arcade Expo where I recorded my panel on the 10 most magical video game consoles. Yes, the 10 most magical consoles. What does that mean? Check out the video. I count down from 10 to 1 and let me know where you agree and disagree. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Video started here. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming out to my panel here. I've never done this particular topic in a panel before. It's going to be on the 10 most magical video game consoles in order, like countdown 10 to 1. And obviously this is subjective, and you could, pop up if you feel like, hey, why did you put that one so high or that one so low or whatever, or if you feel like I've left one off the list that you think should be on here. Now, when I say magical, what I mean is the game consoles that so many people still today just talk about repeatedly, these ones that forums have risen around them, Facebook groups, consoles that impacted the culture, not just video game culture, but the culture at large, ones that are just so fully identifiable with video games that they changed the name of video games. Obviously, there's going to be some consoles in here that but then there's going to be some, there might be one or two. These super mainstream, they had to be ones everybody knows, because that's the whole subject of this panel, is those 10 consoles. And one or two, three that it was brutal to try to leave a couple of these out, and so you'll see what I mean. But anyway, my name is Brett Weiss, which you may or may not know, and I write books about video games. I love lists. I love reference guides. So as a kid, I grew up reading encyclopedia sets. Yeah, that's nerdy. And because my parents had them on the shelves, and I would check those out. And I always liked the Guinness Book of World Records and the greatest this, greatest that, top 100 this or that. Combine my love of video games with my love of reading and collecting books and everything, and boom, all these years later, I've got a baker's dozen of books and counting. Does anybody say baker's dozen anymore? Would a Generation Z person say, what in the world are you talking about? What is that? But anyway, so yeah, I'm working on a third volume in this series. I'm also on YouTube. So let's get to it. The top 10 most magical consoles released in North America. Culture impact, nostalgia, consoles people still discuss and collect for, still making homebrews and all that kind of stuff, or that just had a major impact on the industry and the culture at large. So weighing in at number 10, this is definitely a very heavily biased choice. So I am, it's the ColecoVision. Now I could put it at number 1 because it meant so much to me, but had to be somewhat objective with this list. It was released in August of 1982, which a lot of people, do I need the microphone or are you guys good? It was released in 1982, August, which a lot of people don't realize that's the exact same time, the same month, same year that the Commodore 64 was released. The top selling computer model of all time, even to this day, the C64. But the ColecoVision offered arcade quality graphics and sound unmatched by its early 80s competition. Now there were some 2600 games that that were pretty close to the arcade, like Breakout, Circus Atari, was a lot like Circus, and you had Dodgem, that were sort of resembled their arcade counterparts, not authorized ports, but you know what I mean. But the ColecoVision was really the first system to faithfully mimic arcade games that were graphically sophisticated. In the summer of 1982, when I saw those ColecoVision commercials, and there's a guy standing there at an arcade machine, and those 3D ships are flying out of it, I knew that was BS. Even at 15 years old, that was just hyperbole. But as soon as they showed those Donkey Kong screenshots, looking to me exactly like the arcade game, I had to get a ColecoVision. Up until that point, I didn't own any consoles. I just had some of the Mattel and Coleco handhelds, because those were, birthday gifts. No way my parents were going to shell out $250 for 2600 or 300 for an Intellivision. So I would just play my friends, Odyssey 2, their Atari, their Fairchild Channel F, and all that stuff. So finally, I got a ColecoVision, Christmas of '82. It just had to be done. Just being at home playing arcade-like games blew my mind, and it just rocked the industry because, wow, I mean, it was just a mind-blowing. You really had to live through it to appreciate that, because like Ladybug and Mousetrap, all these obscure arcades, Cosmic Avenger, that were relatively obscure, suddenly you got, perfect, very close resemblances of the arcade classics, with cute cartoonish graphics, really detailed. ColecoVision really was the first system to be able to do that. It had expansion modules, including one that allowed compatibility with the 2600, which was absolutely amazing. And, you had the steering wheel, the super action controllers and all of that. It helped bridge the gap between the second and third generation of consoles. You had the first generation with the Pong clones and the Odyssey, the original Magnavox Odyssey. The ColecoVision and Atari 5200 and Vectrex sort of helped bridge the gap between the first and third generations. As a matter of fact, I had somebody speak up at one of my panels where they thought the 5200 Vectrex and ColecoVision should have been its own generation of consoles. I mean, if the NES Master System and 7800 can be a generation, why can't these three? Because they're so much different than the 2600 Intellivision and Fairchild and those others. And I guess you did that. What year did the Astrocade come out? Was it 82, I think? Anyway, there was I feel like there should be another generation wedged in there because those were so much more sophisticated than the second gen of consoles. But yeah, it's short but impactful lifespan, helped define the early evolution of home gaming before the crash of 1982 or of 1983. The industry was incredible in 82, just billions and billions of dollars. And then all the way to like 84, 85, it was like $100 million, just a whisper of what it used to be. If the Super Action, the Super Game module would have come out for the ColecoVision, it might have extended the life of the console, and I was devastated when the ColecoVision went off the market, but I think it just had a huge impact. It's a console that people still talk about today. The homebrew scene is insane with opcode games, and CollectorVision and other companies, they're porting all these games that we wish would have come out back then today. So yeah, I think the ColecoVision deserves a spot on this list, but you're welcome to differ. Now, next up, number 9 on this list, and I'm looking at this and thinking, gosh, this is a little low on the list, but there's just so many impactful systems over the years. The Sega Genesis came out in 1989. I know, it should be top 3 or 4, right?
I'm ColecoVision. I'm like, how did it get all the way to top 10?
There you go. Yeah, it was very tough to set. Believe me, I poured over this list for way longer than I should have to try to parse this all out. But the Genesis came out in 89, and I actually didn't get my Genesis till 1991 because
Sonic the Hedgehog.
oh my gosh, it made it a must-own system. Altered Beast, the pack-in title with the system when it first came out, was kind of an odd choice, but great game. But it was kind of a difficult game, and it kind of had for 89, it was kind of not the most family-friendly game, not the most mainstream choice, but it was what it was. But a lot of people got a Genesis when the Sonic came out. It just made it a must-own. And it brought 16-bit graphics and blast processing, a totally fabricated term created by marketing, to the home console market. It popularized Sega's edgy image, led by Sonic the Hedgehog as its mascot. Who remembers in 91 when Sonic came out and Super Mario World came out? There were a lot of people that underrated Super Mario World. They thought, well, Mario by this point is kind of stodgy, it's kind of slow. Sonic the Hedgehog is so much cooler, especially with younger people who, wanted the hippest, newest, coolest thing. Sonic was a brand new character. Mario was seen as kind of irrelevant at this point by certain gamers. Obviously, the NES was huge. Super Mario World was huge. Super Nintendo ended up outselling the Genesis like 50 million to 30-something million. But there was a window of time there where Nintendo and Mario were seen as uncool by a lot of young people. And Sega, they had that great edgy, sort of, for the time. Now you look back at it and it's all cartoonish. But at the time, they were considered a lot cooler. And it was the first real competitor to Nintendo's dominance, fueling the console wars of the 1990s, which there's been books and movies written about, so hugely impactful. As a matter of fact, I did a video on my channel about 1989 as the #1 most important pop culture year in the history of the world. Now that's like, wow, 1989, why? Sega Genesis, Game Boy, Nirvana's first album, Little Mermaid brought Disney back. Before Little Mermaid, Disney had kind of wallowed for a few years there with underwhelming box office numbers with lower production values compared to their, classic Snow White. I mean, if you look at Snow White and Pinocchio compared to Oliver and Company, for example, I mean, there's a big difference there. But then Little Mermaid brought that back. So 89, look it up. It's incredible how much stuff happened in 89, including the Sega Genesis. I'd also put 72 and a few other years in there, 77 with Atari and Star Wars. But I like to go on tangents, but I won't. Anyway, the Genesis offered a massive and diverse library from Road Rash to Streets of Rage to Final Fantasy IV. I was working at Lone Star Comics, a comic book chain in Arlington, Texas, when the Genesis came out, and I was still rocking my NES and my Intellivision, ColecoVision, and all that. And I figured I didn't need a Genesis right away. I was always a late adopter. I would wait at least till that first price break, at least when they took $50 off the console, brand new. So I was a late adopter, so I was content to wait. But people around the office, like customers, coworkers, have you played the Genesis? Have you played the Genesis? It's amazing. The graphics, the sounds, it's just an incredible system. And it indeed was. And it expanded through add-ons like the Sega CD and 32X, pioneering early multimedia gaming, the full motion video. It's sort of infamous now, with the muddy graphics and the pixelation and everything, but it was groundbreaking stuff at the time. And I remember I wanted a Sega CD so bad, and I was convinced my mother-in-law was going to get me one for Christmas one year. I don't know why, but I just had it in my head that she was going to. And instead, she got me a Tasmanian Devil t-shirt. So it didn't quite, not quite what I was hoping for, but I don't know why I had that in my head, but maybe I hinted about it, but it didn't quite work out. That's number 9, and I know some of you probably think that's a little low, but we'll continue, and we'll see. Yes, sir?
I was going to add to what you said about, I have an opinion about what they said about the blast processing and what led them to that.
Mm-hmm.
I had bought the Super Nintendo when it was new, of course, and I bought a handful of the first games that came out, and the first games that came out for the Super Nintendo were plagued with like slow
Super R-Type was just such slowdown. Yeah, it really kind of a little bit of a bad reputation there.
Yes, and Super Ghouls and Ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
If you start moving too fast with too many enemies moving around, the game starts shuddering to a halt, and I figured that's where they must have got, because Sonic will never slow down. I mean,
And that combined with just the slow nature of Mario games in general, like purposely slow, sort of added to that, where the Genesis was just seen as cooler, hipper, faster.
I just don't think they knew what they were doing in the beginning, and they got better with their programming.
Yeah.
Because of course, if you Donkey Kong Country.
Oh my gosh. Just imagine if that would have been the pack-in with the 91. Well, Super Mario World, I mean, you can't argue with that. But imagine if Donkey Kong Country would have come out in 91, like as a launch title or shortly thereafter. I mean, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
How much would the CD have cost at that time that you were?
I think it was about $250 or so.
Almost $300.
Yeah, $280, something like that. Yeah, with tax and everything, it would have been around $300, which is a lot of money. First credit card used on the Sega CD. Hey, that's a great use of a credit card. And that would have been what, like about $700 now, 800, something like that. All right, so number 8 is the Xbox 360. Now this seems like a no-brainer to me. It came out in 2005. It revolutionized online console gaming with Xbox Live and unified friend system with gamer tags and the like. It made so much of what is going on with gaming now began with the Xbox 360 as far as the online stuff, the community stuff, your gamer tag. I mean, back when we were playing Atari and ColecoVision, my name was Brett Weiss, and it stayed that way. But once you get into, this era, you have a gamer tag, you have a nickname or whatever. It introduced achievements and game score, now standard features across platforms. It popularized digital downloads and indie games through Xbox Live and arcade. So a lot of people played retro titles on that and others because of that. So yeah, it sort of kind of kickstarted, popularized, and really started snowballing the modern era of gaming. It was Microsoft's breakout success in the console market, helping shape modern console ecosystems. So yeah, Xbox 360. Anybody argue that it shouldn't be on here? I mean, to me, it seems like a no-brainer. All right, next up. Now, I'm not doing computers here, or the Commodore 64 would be there, but I'm sticking with consoles, handhelds, just specific game systems. And I'm not doing like Atari, Pong, or something like that. It's just cartridge-based, disc-based consoles. So number 7, here's another one you might think is a little low on the list, is the Game Boy that came out in 1989. Again, that amazing pop culture year. I mean, it defined portable gaming with its durable design and incredible battery life. A decade earlier, the Microvision had come out, just had these faceplates that acted as cartridges, just super primitive. You could barely see the screen, just these little squares, really primitive games. And then here's the Game Boy a decade later with fully playable, really nice looking games if you had the proper light source. I was a Game Gear guy myself because I like the backlighting and the bigger screen and all that kind of stuff, but the Game Boy was interesting, and I did grow to like the Game Boy when the Super Game Boy came out and I could play it on my TV. But it achieved instant success. It was popular right away because of the portability, and thanks to its pack-in title, one of the most, maybe outside of, it might be the most impactful killer app of all time, Tetris, for the Game Boy. It sold the system like crazy. And even if you weren't crazy about the sort of dull graphics and the greenish, grayish, yellowish, I don't even know what color that is. I mean, it's monochrome and somehow multicolored at the same time. It's got black, green, puke. I don't know what all that is, but anyway, with something simple like Tetris, you didn't mind that it wasn't super sophisticated in terms of color and lighting and everything. It was just the perfect game for that console. It introduced beloved series like Pokemon, which obviously became a global phenomenon that could be its own panel. It outsold more powerful competitors like the Atari Lynx, which I was very jealous of anybody that had one of those. Got one later, of course. And my beloved Game Gear. My wife and I, when we were dating and early in our marriage before we had kids, we treated our Game Gear, there's a Freudian slip. We treated our Game Gear like our child. We bought all the accessories for it. We had the case for it, and you could plug it in, the car, and the cigarette lighter, what is that, if you're younger? But anyway, we loved our Game Gear, but the Game Boy had just such a much bigger impact on the society, at large. And it paved the way for decades of Nintendo handheld dominance. I mean, the DS, I didn't put it on my list. It probably should be. But I couldn't kick out any of these others. The DS was massive, and the Game Boy paved the way for and then the Switch too. Just portable Nintendo gaming started with the Game Boy, had to be on the list. And as I look at it, you might think it's a little low, and I might not disagree with you. On a given day, I might have put it up higher. Next up at number 6, again, if you have any questions or anything along the way, feel free. PlayStation 2 came out in 2000. It remains the best-selling home console of all time with over 155 million units sold. And Nintendo, if they cared about this kind of number, they would have delayed the Switch 2, which I think should be called the Super Switch. That seemed obvious to me. The Switch 2 is a boring title. If they would have delayed that, the Switch probably would have passed up the PlayStation 2 in console sales. But now that the Switch 2 is out, it probably won't. So the PS2 will probably remain the best-selling home console of all time for eternity. So it had to be on the list. For that and a bunch of other reasons. It doubled as an affordable DVD player, expanding its market beyond gamers. It was my first DVD player. Any of you, was that your very first DVD player? Yeah. And it really made the DVD format mainstream. It helped that anyway. And it introduced a lot of people to high definition movies in their homes, which was huge, relatively high definition compared to like 4K or whatever. But back then it was amazing, growing up in the VHS era to see DVD movies on like a 36-inch TV, still a CRT, but it was great. It was just mind blowing. You could see so much definition and the widescreen and everything. It was just awesome. It hosted an enormous library with genre-defining titles like Grand Theft Auto 3, which, the first 2 Grand Theft Autos were these sort of top-down games, and then the third one just completely shattered the notion of, sandbox games and mature games and all that kind of stuff. So huge. Shadow of the Colossus, God of War, one of my favorite games of all time. There's so many great third-person hack and slash games on the PS2, which is one reason why it's one of my favorite consoles of all time. My favorite 3D game of all time is Maximo Ghost of Glory, and it's on the PS2. That game didn't really affect the culture at large, or the system helped sell it, but it's my personal favorite, so I added that to things about the PS2 that should be on the list. So there's a little bias here, but I think the PS2 absolutely belongs. It's supported backward compatibility with the PlayStation 1 games, at least most of them. There's about 8 titles, including Arcade Party Pack, that aren't backwards compatible. But that was huge. You know, everybody had their massive PlayStation 1 had a massive library, and a lot of people had, huge collections. So it was awesome that you could play it on the PlayStation 2. And it cemented Sony's dominance in the early 2000s console market. The PS3, by comparison, was a relative failure. But man, the PS2 was just everywhere. And it absolutely belongs on this list. I can't imagine leaving it out. Now, you might think it belongs a little lower, a little higher, but feel free to weigh in. Next up at number 5, we're getting down to it. We're getting down to the heavyweights here. The Super Nintendo came out in 1991. I bought my Super Nintendo not right away because I always wait. The first time they had a price break, I think it went down to either $250 to $200. I think that, or $200. Consoles started getting cheaper. I mean, the NES, you could get an NES not long after launch for like $99 compared to like the Intellivision, $250, $300. So, and they were, consoles became loss leaders where, they would sell the console like a razor, that kind of, the whole thing. But anyway, I did wait for the price break, even though it was, pretty cheap to begin with. But man, it had some of the most beloved 16-bit titles ever made. Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which is still my favorite Zelda game. Super Metroid, just a mind-blowing game that a lot of people consider still one of the greatest video games of all time. I still regret selling my CIB copy when it got to be around, can't remember, somewhere between $100 and $200 for a CIB Super Metroid. I'd played it like crazy, put it on eBay. Kind of wish I had that back now, but at the time, it was a long time ago, I kind of needed the money. Anyway, it featured superior audio and Mode 7 graphics that enabled rotating and scaling effects. It truly was a Super NES. It basically took what the NES made great and made it better. You've got the D-pad on the NES was amazing. It was influenced by the Game & Watch titles, the D-pad and everything. But the Super Nintendo took that and rounded out the corners and gave you more buttons and shoulder buttons and everything. To this day, probably my favorite controller of all time, maybe tied with a dual analog on the PS1, PS2. But yeah, it had an incredible controller. It took those great properties that were introduced on the NES and Famicom and brought them in, with just bigger worlds and better graphics and better sounds and everything. It laid the foundation for great franchises that are still active today, like Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox. And it remains a touchstone for 2D game design and artistic excellence. To this day, some of those Super Nintendo games are some of the most beautiful games ever made, like Donkey Kong Country. Just
Yes.
gorgeous to look at. Yeah, just a wonderful system with amazing audio, visuals. And yeah, Super Nintendo at number 5. Now at number... Yes, please.
Quick debate here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with you.
Bring it on.
But I think the gap between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo is too far on your list.
Meaning,
You place them too far apart there. The Genesis, it came first.
Mhm.
It was faster, and quite honestly, without the success of Sonic and the marketing
Mhm.
that they did, they probably wouldn't even pushed and came up and partnered with Silicon Graphics. There
That's a great
to
point.
do the
Right.
Donkey Kong Country.
both
In a way, that was
hugely...
a stepping stone for them to
Yeah.
do not only what they were already planning, but
Mm-hmm.
let's find how we can push this further to try to get some market back. So.
Absolutely, both huge. It would make sense to put them back to back, maybe tied at number 5 or something. Yeah, that's a very good point. It was a tough list to come up with. Yes.
I have another good thing to throw in there.
Sure.
You mentioned anybody that loved Super Nintendo. All you gotta do is say the words aquatic ambiance, and then you'll have hours of discussion.
Right. Could you care to elaborate on that, sir?
Oh, yes, that's the soundtrack. That's the music, and when you were in the water in Donkey Kong Country.
Oh, right.
Just
Yes.
hearing it,
It is.
it takes you right back to
You say that, and I can hear it. My wife and I played the first Donkey Kong Country, especially just for so many hours. We had been playing Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and we started that kind of created like real life conflict. So we started with Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2. We started playing cooperatively, and it worked out a lot better.
I think those are the very best games ever made for that system.
They're incredible.
And I think that, like I said, when you look back to where, you had trouble with Super Ghouls and Ghosts slowing down and everything, that game is an absolute benchmark masterpiece for that system.
Yeah. Yeah. Rarely have you had such a great game. Sorry. My bad.
You could have a whole panel on how Microsoft destroyed Rare. So.
Right. Yeah. That conversation for another day. But yeah, that's a good point. Genesis and Super Nintendo were so synonymous. Yeah, it might have been made sense to put them right together. So that's a good point too. So yeah.
Just one last thing. Just a personal observation.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the best way that I've found to compare those two consoles is Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's exactly the same game,
Mm-hmm.
but you can see the visual quality is better on the Super Nintendo. And you can see the speed and flow on the Genesis.
It's really
That's
interesting to
easy
compare,
do that.
like Captain America versus the Avengers. There's a few other games that have marketed Aladdin. One he's got a scimitar, one he doesn't. It's really interesting to do direct comparisons between games that were coming out at the same time. And if you Google it, you'll find some really interesting lists online. So for sure, yeah, you could do a head-to-head comparison with so many titles. It's really, really interesting. All right, guys. So at number 4, I think this pick wouldn't be my favorite system. And I think the Super Nintendo, I think all the systems I've already mentioned I prefer. But this system made such a cultural impact, and people have just insane amounts of nostalgia for the Nintendo 64 from 1996. Super Mario 64 just blew it out of the water. I mean, it popularized and it showed developers how to do a 3D platformer, basically.
Yes.
And I discussed this some on Playing with Power, the Nintendo story, the documentary that I'm in, that I do have at my table for sale. Yeah, Super Mario 64 it was as impactful almost as the original Super Mario Brothers, because it brought video games. It just changed the industry completely. It was like when Sgt. Pepper's came out, everybody that was making video games stopped down to play Super Mario Brothers and then Super Mario 64, and it influenced everything moving forward. And it was the first major console to use analog control, revolutionizing movement in 3D games. It gave rise to classics like Banjo-Kazooie, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, another game that people consider one of the greatest of all time. And it used cartridges instead of discs, which was an odd choice, but it resulted in faster load times, for what that's worth. And there were durable media. And it's one reason the Nintendo 64 is so collectible today. Like if you look at the N64 collecting community versus the PS1, now those are both great libraries. But man, you get boxed N64 games in perfect condition. Man, there's like these auctions and everything, and just those are so highly sought after. Yeah, there's obviously the PS1 RPGs that there's a great market for, but man, just the collectability of N64 games is off the charts, and probably more important than anything, other than the impact of Super Mario 64, it brought back couch co-op. The Atari 2600 had so many great 2 and 4 player games, and it was meant to be played together with the paddle controllers and everything. It brought back that vibe of couch co-op, of 4-player action, and it hosted some of the most memorable local multiplayer experiences ever made. You talk to people that grew up playing GoldenEye and so many other 4-player games on the system, Mario Kart, and they just hold it in such reverence. And that's why I put it at number 4 above some of these other systems, and because it's just so beloved, and it just really, it formed it really impacted the childhoods of so many people, and they have so many great memories of playing N64. I mean, it's just.
And may I add to that? And what makes me so sad is all the games that are coming out now, of course, they're technologically superior and blah, 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 this, blah, blah, blah. But they don't want you to get the modern systems and have your friends come over and play and enjoy together. No, they want you all at your own houses paying subscription fees.
DLC and everything too.
And they just ruin it. I mean, as much as they make it great, they're ruining it at the same time. It's like a weird give and take.
Well, that's the great thing about conventions like this, where we can all get together, play games together, and be communal and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, but I just thought the N64. I thought, gosh, that's kind of high on the list, but ahead of the Genesis and Super Nintendo. But the topic of the panel is magical, and man, for that, people just look at that as just such a magical system. Yes.
I'm glad you added it. I mean, it's just a personal thing.
Mhm.
I had stopped playing any games for I don't know how many years. And we had just moved to Houston, my wife and I. We had our son, who was just a year old.
Yeah.
We're in Blockbuster, we walk in. Again, I hadn't looked at a game in I don't know how long.
Yeah.
Right up there, they've got the thin planes with Super Mario.
Yeah.
Realized we could take it home in a hard shell case. We had walked in to get 2 movies. We picked up the movies. Got home, plug in, start playing. We played that thing for the rest of the night.
Oh, that's
Till the
awesome.
morning. We
Yeah.
didn't even watch the movie. We were like,
Right.
just kept playing. And I was like,
Yeah.
Can you? And that's what it looked like. I remember looking up at the monitor, going, "Look at this thing."
Yeah. Mario as
I had
a
not-
fully 3D cartoon character.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I hadn't looked at a game in I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
There's this thing running around. I'm like, wow.
Well,
you
Just like Ratatouille.
You just brought
Yeah.
up another point. I mean, it's like I'm reluctant to try any new games because you cannot rent and try. It's too expensive. Oh, that game
Yeah,
looks
that's
like it might be
fine,
fun.
too.
$80.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm home
Yeah,
in
but
the
that's all
80s.
part of the
Yeah.
overall ecosystem that existed back then. I mean,
Yes.
now there's one Blockbuster too. But there were places that actually, and the companies did that. They had their little suitcase that went with it and said,
Yeah.
rent it out of these.
Yeah, because
places
people
and
forget how
let's
expensive
let's
some of
get
these
one
games
sold."
were.
Yeah.
There were N64, Super Nintendo, and Genesis games that were $60, $70, and $80.
Exactly. I remember I bought Mario 64 on launch day and it was
Uh-huh.
$75 plus
Yeah,
tax.
people forget that, and if you look at inflation,
Oh,
the
yeah.
stuff now is cheap. So yeah, N64, I had to put it up that high. All right, guys, let's get to the top 3. We are really getting it, and you might already know in your head these 3, but we'll go through the reasons why and why they're listed like this. So number 3, the PlayStation 1, 1995. I mean, it led to the PlayStation 2, so that's a big deal right there. But it helped transition the gaming industry from cartridges to CD-ROMs. It made that transition. It became a cultural phenomenon with titles like Final Fantasy VII, which people just hold in such reverence. I mean, talk about magical. Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil. I mean, I've talked to people that said that Final Fantasy VII was the first game that made them cry or that have an emotional connection to a video game. It attracted older audiences, gaming beyond a kids-only image. Prior to the PS1, literally every game system that came before it, there are some like interactive media type things, but as far as, you got the CD-ROM 3D, whatever, the PS1 really brought gaming into a space where, let's say you bring a date home and you pull out your N64 or your go back before that, your Genesis or Super Nintendo. Okay, that's a toy, whatever. But you have the PS1 up there looking gray and slick, and it plays CDs, and it's got these, Metal Gear Solid. It's got all this mature stuff on it. That seemed kind of cool, kind of adult, kind of cutting edge. It changed everything as far as just the perception of the industry. It really jump-started the notion that video games weren't just for kids. I mean, and if you lived through that, you really felt the impact of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the PS1's what got me back to consoles.
Okay.
I went from the Atari 2600, well, actually VCS is what we called
Yeah.
it back then.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't the 2600 till the 5200 came out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I went from the Atari to home computers with the VIC 20.
Yeah.
I did everything on computers
Mhm.
up until the PS1.
Boy, there's a gap from the 2600 to the PS1. That's great. But yeah, because it changed everything. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, it pioneered 3D graphics on a mass scale. It popularized 3D graphics in video games. It defined the look of the late 90s, and it established Sony as a dominant force. I mean, we got the PS5 today, and just, without the PS1, you wouldn't have just Sony domination. So yeah, the PS1, I think it's pretty easy to put that at number 3. I think it even goes a little bit higher. Number 2 and 1 should be pretty obvious. Number 2, who thinks? What do you think is going to be number 2?
I
Yes,
think it's gonna be the Wii.
that's a good guess.
I think the 2 would be the NES.
You're close. The Wii barely missed the cut. It was super influential. Motion controls. There were Wiis in nursing homes. It got people up off the couch. But man, I just couldn't. It'd be number 11. I mean, so And the DS would be up there at number 12, whatever. The Atari 2600, 1977.
I thought that'd be number one.
It was close.
Thinking that.
Not 1 and 2 are very.
Yeah, it was close.
He writes books on Nintendo, so of course.
Hey, now. It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy. Hey, this book is loaded down with Atari. And the very first book I ever wrote, the Classic Home Video Games book, it's super Atari. Yeah, it's very Atari. Yes, this is all a big conspiracy to sell more books. That's hilarious. So the 2600 came out in 1977. Prior to that, video games were sort of a niche thing. Pong had some commercial success at home. I mean, Atari sold a lot of Pong consoles. Pong in the arcades sold a lot. But the 2600 really brought video games into the mainstream. The Fairchild Channel F came out in 1976. My two best friends each had one, oddly enough. My next door neighbor and a guy that lived a mile from me. That was mind-blowing. But then the 2600 came out. That's when everybody at school started talking about video games at home. That was a lot of people, that was the first time they ever played a video game at home. When the 2600 came out, I hadn't heard of the original Magnavox Odyssey that came out in 72. I never heard of it. I don't recall seeing a commercial. None of my friends had it. It was just a fluke that I knew two people with the Fairchild Channel F. They were the only two people I knew. They just happened to be my two best friends, which might have been part of the reason that led me to where I'm at right now. But yeah, it popularized the cartridge-based home console model. It brought iconic arcade games like Asteroids, Pac-Man, and Space Invaders into living rooms. As a kid, having to spend a quarter every time you played a game, or if you get lucky and you find a quarter in a coin slot, or a credit on a machine, or a quarter under a thing. I had experience doing this. I would try to play arcade games as cheaply as possible because I had very little money. I got $1 a week for allowance. So I would try to, I've got a whole video on playing arcade games on the cheap back in the 70s and 80s, where you just, sometimes if the game acted weird, like if I was playing pinball and I thought the machine was unfair, I would tell the arcade operator, hey, this pinball machine did blah, 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 and they'd put a free credit on there. I would also stand behind people playing pinball. Like if there was a little kid or a parent playing pinball and they were on their last ball, back then it was usually 5 balls, I would stand there and wait till and then they would walk off. And I would hope they would match. So I had a 10% chance of them matching a game. That's how desperate I was to play games back then because I didn't have any money. But anyway, the notion of being able to go to my friend's house, ride my bike over there, walk, whatever, and play these games like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, and Asteroids. Now, Space Invaders and Asteroids, I think you could objectively say they're great games. Space Invaders I like even better than the arcade classic with all the variations. Asteroids is way different than the arcade game. It's a completely different vibe, but I think it's a great game just into itself. Pac-Man, you could argue, obviously it's a terrible port, but back in the day when it came out, absolutely loved it. Played it for hours upon hours upon hours, just because you could do it at home for free and keep playing it. And it's actually, if you forget about the IP and just play it as a maze game, it's solid. It introduced millions to home gaming. A lot of people back then started calling video games Ataris. You know, whether you've got an Odyssey 2 or a Intellivision Astrocade.
One of your friends' house plays Atari.
Yeah. Even if they have an RCA Studio 2, in the unlikely event that they have an RCA Studio 2, you're going to play Atari. And later, obviously, that would be Nintendo. That people would call video games, but it inspired an explosion of third-party development, for better or for worse, which is part of what led to the crash. But anyway, it just put video games in the mainstream. Suddenly, toy stores, department stores had full, sections of video games, rows, aisles. It started everything that we know today. It popularized everything we know today. It really created the industry as far as being, a thing. So yeah, Atari 2600, you could argue that it could be number one, but man, there's just no getting past what I put at number one. The 2600 set the stage for both like I'm keeping it a secret or something, set the stage for both the 83 crash and the rebirth of home console gaming. Absolutely, I feel like it belongs at number 2. Number 1, now let me know if you think I put the NES too high at number 1. I would love to hear from you. Remember, it's a panel about the most magical consoles. The NES took over the United States. You know, I'm very North American slanted. My books are North American, and that's just what I do. And people say, why don't you write, you know, a book about imports? Why don't you do this? I'm like, well, if I could clone myself to do that, gladly I would. But my attention and the time I have is North American, and it absolutely took over North America. I mean, not only did it change gaming, but it changed the culture. It completely took over the culture. So it revived the U.S. home video game industry after the '83 crash, obviously. It introduced franchises like Super Mario Brothers, Legends, Zelda, and Metroid, and yeah, the Famicom introduced a lot of these properties, but in North America, we didn't. As a kid, as a teenager, even when I was 20 and I got an NES, I don't know if I could have told you what the Famicom was, you know, without the internet and everything. We didn't know about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it wasn't on TV. You know, there was nothing on the news about the Famicom. The NES was all over the news. The NES was the first system I recall seeing news reports on. Now, there might be the occasional, like, cautionary tale about video games as far as, you know, I remember C. Everett Koop, under President Reagan, was the Surgeon General. And he would talk about the violence in video games having a negative effect on kids without any real data. But this was things like Galaxian and Space Invaders. You know, that was the most violent that games got at the time. And I guess you could look at what was that, Death Race, you know, something like that. But just cartoons, really. But anyway, so you would see the occasional thing on TV about video games. But with the NES, I suddenly hear video games being talked about on radio talk shows, that people that were just covering sort of mainstream politics or mainstream news stories or, you know, just pop culture were suddenly talking about video games. It set the standard for controller design and console branding. It elevated Nintendo to global prominence as an industry leader. Again, people are calling video games Nintendos. And it established modern gaming fundamentals in storytelling, platforming, polish that still influences developers today. But to me, what made the NES so magical was the fact that it completely changed what kids were suddenly talking about, what kids were suddenly doing. All of a sudden, the playground conversations were not about, you know, how many points did Larry Bird have last night? You know, who did Carlton Fisk? What was his pitching stats? They were talking about, how do you get past this particular boss? How, you know, what's the, you know, I have this code that I saw on Nintendo Power. You know, this is how you do. You know, you're bringing Nintendo Power to school. You're showing each other these maps. How did you get past this? You know, the conversation changed from other topics. Now, yeah, sure, other topics were still around, obviously, but the NES, it brought something completely new. It brought a new conversation. It brought a new culture to young people. And it revived the magazine market. You know, everybody talks about, you know, the video game industry had pretty much gone away to almost nothing after the crash, and the NES brought that back in North America. It also brought back the magazine industry. As a matter of fact, video game magazine publishing in the United States, there were 0 magazines, like mainstream slick magazines, on the stands when Super Mario Brothers came out. There are no contemporary reviews of Super Mario Brothers, and there's almost nothing. There might be one for Zelda. For Super Mario Brothers, the only review in North America there exists is like Computer Entertainer, this little newsletter put out in California by a video store. Can you imagine today a AAA title coming out, the most famous game, you know, just this massive titles, and there's literally nowhere you can read a review? And so Nintendo, by bringing out the NES, they brought back magazine publishing. They brought back game journalists. They brought back people, you know, just the discussion of video games. And it completely changed the culture, especially with young people. So we've got a few minutes here for questions. Yes?
I like the number one pick. I think the other thing, and actually maybe as important as everything you mentioned about the NES, is they fixed the economics on the business side of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because before that, all the things that happened that caused the crash.
Yeah.
Nintendo held the line, even though people thought that they were being horrible, and for better or worse,
Yeah.
they did the DRM and third-party licensing, and
Right.
and held the line on quality.
Yeah.
And sort of set the stage for economics that everybody else would follow to make
Yes.
the industry viable. So you can like or not like the DRM, but they made
Right.
the industry viable for all the other consoles.
And strangely, that magical Nintendo there were still some bad games. There just weren't the glut all at once, like with the 2600, and by when the NES came out, there was a little luck involved too. When the NES was test marketed in 85, and by the time it was fully rolled out in 86, most of that old inventory, a lot of that had been, they'd sold it all off or dumped it in a certain landfill. And so once Nintendo convinced buyers for Sears and toy stores and things that to try the NES, at least they didn't still have all that dead inventory for the most part. And they were skeptical and they didn't want to do, a lot of buyers just said video games. Those are, yeah, but having Rob and having it as with the gun and Duck Hunt and as an entertainment system as opposed to just strictly a video game console kind of helped for
There
sure.
you go. I was going to lead right into that.
Yeah.
Because of the crash, you probably already know this, so please forgive me for trying.
That's okay. Well, some of my listeners might not know on YouTube,
Um,
or viewers.
After the crash, when the original Nintendo Entertainment System came out, they didn't sell it as a video game system. That's why it came with Rob. It was like an interactive toy.
Called a Trojan horse.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they promised everybody that Nintendo said, the major stores, if you buy these, we promise to buy back anything you don't sell to give them the reassurance to get it back into the stores, and it worked because they said if you don't sell these, we will buy them back.
Well, they knew they had something magic on their, they knew they had something good.
And they didn't have to buy anything back. No, we had to give you more.
I would be really curious to know what would have happened if there were no such thing as Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda and Super Metroid. Let's take those three games out of the equation and any sequels. I wonder how impactful the Super Nintendo or the NES and Famicom would have been. I mean, it might have followed a similar trajectory, but I don't know about the mainstream absolute dominance.
Well, I have to chime in on that one too. It's the same with Sonic because the Genesis was doing okay. Their
Mhm.
major seller was Altered Beast on the Genesis.
Because it was the
for
Pac-Man,
Sonic.
yeah.
And if those games didn't come along, I don't think they probably would have been sluggish.
Right.
Just like when Donkey Kong Country came along, it
Mhm.
just I mean everybody loves Super Mario World and everything, but Donkey Kong Country blows away Super Mario World.
Well, there might be some people that argue with you because, I remember when Donkey Kong Country came out, there were some people saying, hey, this is just rudimentary platforming. There's really nothing new here. But it did it so beautifully and it did it so well and slick and just, it was like I don't know that it did much new as far as basic gameplay goes. Not a lot. But what it did with platforming, it did it incredibly well, like almost no other platformer before it. But it wasn't necessarily revolutionary in terms of gameplay. And I remember hearing a little criticism for that. And I'm like, come on, guys,
Well, I even had to buy a game guide because no matter what I did, I could not get up to 100%. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. But I still had a 13-inch television set. And what it was doing, it was cutting off the lower portion of the game, and I couldn't see those bonus barrels. You see the little bonus barrel that's slightly at the bottom? Well, I couldn't see it, and I was looking. I bought the guy. Said, "There's a barrel there," and I could not see it. I had to buy a new television.
The struggle was real. When I would go to my cousin's house in Arkansas to play Odyssey 2, there was a game. Was it UFO that required color, like you had to know what color certain objects were on the screen, but she had a black and white TV because her dad wouldn't let her play it in the living room because he thought of the screen burn and because he watched TV a lot, and so he didn't want it in there, and so we would play this game just sort of farting around with it, having fun anyway. But so yeah, the struggle was real. The kids today with their flat screens and their multimedia things in their bedrooms, and all that, and that's another thing. The NES. So with the Atari 2600. And most systems like that, it was a living room thing. Well, the NES with Zelda and Metroid and these deeper, more personal experiences, a lot of video games gravitated towards the bedrooms because it was more of a solo experience. And during that time period, during the 80s, more kids got TVs in their rooms, a little more indulgent parents at that time. So yeah, the NES just completely changed culture. Now, did I leave anything out? The DS and the Wii need to be in here somewhere, but there's only 10, so. Yes.
So I think with the Wii, and this makes more sense to me now, there is, your list is basing it off of our generation. You know, I've got a son who is, I guess, 22 now.
Mhm.
You know, and whenever he comes back to the house, you know, the nostalgia thing is to bring out the Wii.
Yeah.
With all of his friends.
Right.
Get together and have parties with the Wii because that was their generation.
Yeah, everybody's gonna have a different list based on their
Yeah,
experiences.
I think it's really your list is gonna vary depending on the age group.
Sure,
Yes.
and I was still gaming during all these generations, and then you know, in the future, you make a list like this, the Switch will very likely be on it because it took over. I remember seeing that first Switch commercial when you got all these 20-somethings and they take this little portable system with them to play basketball or go to a bar or something. Like, what is this? This is going to be some odd little niche item. And I thought the Wii U was going to be a huge success. So I do get things wrong from time to time. But yeah, it was the Switch will very likely nudge its way onto this list. I think you had a yes.
Yeah, the PlayStation 2, when you were talking about the consoles being in the bedroom,
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's in the living room, and I think that had a big influence on getting the non-gamer in the home
Mhm.
to play.
Yeah, it's funny that a lot of so the game systems kind of gravitated back towards the living room with the big screen TVs and the high def and you know these more cinematic experiences. So yeah, that's a good point. Anybody else?
I
You.
have a question.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that the game E.T. precipitated the crash in the video game?
I think it played a small role, but it's way too blown out of proportion. You know, they made
Yes.
already a bunch of horrible games.
yeah, the glut of the market, the demographic getting older and growing out of video games.
I'm just
And the
saying
fact that Atari should have replaced the 2600 earlier. A better system should have come out in around 81, not 82. The 5200 was a poor replacement for it because of the controller, and it was gigantic. And I like the 5200. I love it, in fact, but it wasn't enough of an evolutionary leap because you just had better looking arcade ports for the most part. But there are a lot that goes into the crash. Every controller pre-NES had a problem. The joystick was stiff on the 2600. The television D-pad was weird. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons for the crash beyond ET. So it gets unfairly blamed.
It is unfairly blamed. That game,
Yeah.
to me, was a lot of fun and it was a good challenge.
If you read the instructions,
Yeah.
And it was
What is
created in
everybody
what, 5
bitching about
weeks?
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, the game was created in 5 weeks. and
Yeah.
released. I mean,
Yeah, he was under the
Howard
gun.
did what he could do with what he had.
now here, this is interesting. What time do we have here?
It's
11:22.
Okay, so we got a little bit. I've heard, and I even thought this would be smart. I thought that instead of ET, like a complex, sort of a kind of obtuse game that people just didn't quite get, or that was a little esoteric as far as just mainstream gamers, I thought, what if they would have made a Pac-Man clone where ET goes around gobbling up Reese's Pieces? You even have a commercial tie-in. You get a simple game that everybody understands, but I don't know if it was Howard that said this or somebody said that. I think even Spielberg recommended, hey, why don't you just make a Pac-Man game? But apparently that would be harder to program than ET was. I don't know. So regardless of the reason, maybe Howard had
He talks about it in his book and his lectures, and he also says that he couldn't believe that he had asked him about making something like a Pac-Man.
So for him that was out of the question. He didn't want to do a Pac-Man clone.
Yeah, I mean, he was just thinking, you have this title, this IP.
Yeah, make an adventure game. It's an adventure movie. Make an adventure game. Yeah.
And the funny thing is everybody always complained about falling in the holes. It's really simple. As soon as you start to fall, you hit the button and you stop and you go back up. And when you're on the map, you move to the left or to the right. If you try and go up, you're going to go right back down.
Right. All right. Anybody else that hadn't asked a question yet, or anybody at all? Paul, welcome. You got your panel next. What are you got? You're going to be talking about Mortal Kombat.
Probably we'll mention Mortal Kombat. That'll come into play, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for anybody that doesn't know, this is Paul Niemeyer, a good friend of mine who did cabinet art and other art. Satan's Hollow, Super Pac-Man, so many great games that I love. He was a very good artist for these machines and everything. But he'll be doing a panel next if you want to check that out. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
I was just gonna say for the record, I I know that this is most impactful. I would have put in television Vectrex on my personal most important list.
Vectrex was, I love the Vectrex. It's so cool, and it's definitely magical. I mean, it's amazing that you could get a system and you don't have to take, if your brother or sister want to watch TV or your parents are watching TV or whatever, you can just go back and have your own screen. And it was amazing to have those graphics.
Yeah, Vector, the only problem is, I was gonna say the same thing. I didn't know a single person that had it because it was incredibly expensive for the time. And crazy expensive.
It got really cheap a short time later. I mean, I've heard people say they got them as low as $10 at KB Toys.
Really?
Stacks of them. Yeah, because but yeah, the Vectrex is magical. And what was your other choice? The television. See, at number 10, I could have easily put in television in because that has a hardcore community. People have wonderful memories of NFL football, NBA basketball, Space Battle. Astro Smash is iconic. I mean, Big Bang Theory.
Just sit and play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And
Yeah, it's got D&D.
The dragon, he's there, he's sleeping.
you
he's
can
playing.
breathe, you can
Yeah.
breathe.
You hear the snakes.
Yeah.
And the Tron game and the B-17 bomber. So yeah, it's permeated popular culture than television for sure. That was a painful one to leave out because I love that system, grew up playing it, and I've got some stories for that, but we should probably leave it about there. Guys, I am, so if you, between the arcade and the vendor's room, there's guest row, Paul, myself, we've got things for sale. I've got my books and everything. Be happy to sign a book and whatever. Or if you just want to talk about, come by and talk more about this topic, I will be here till, I don't know, about 5 or so, maybe 6 today. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate all the great questions. Appreciate the interactivity and everything. So I really appreciate you guys. Now, either hang out, watch Paul, or go play some pinball, or more importantly, come buy some stuff at my booth. And you, YouTube viewers, thank you for watching. Be sure and hit that like and subscribe button. Houston Arcade Expo 2025, incredible show. Love it. Talk to you in another video.